Are you craving a trip on Space Mountain? Well, we've got the next best thing. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and today on the show, I have former Jungle Cruise skipper, Skipper Dino, joining me to discuss the world-famous Jungle Cruise. Jungle Cruise has been part of Disney Parks history since Disneyland first opened on July 17th, 1955. It's quite unbelievable to think that it's lasted as long as it has, and that its popularity seems to be as big as ever. Of course, that doesn't mean that the iconic attraction hasn't had its problems through the years. Listen as Dino and I discuss the attraction's history, what it was like being a skipper, and some of the more recent updates made to the attraction. It's all coming your way right after this. Alright, I'm talking to you, Disney pin collectors. I know there are many of you out there. But did you know that Who's Its and What's Its has their own magically inspired pins available? A lot of people know and love Who's Its and What's Its for their magically inspired shirts, hats, and apparel, but yep, pins are included in that as well. So click the link in this episode's description and check out the pins and all of the other merch available to you, and don't forget that you can save 15% off of everything that you order simply by using code DCTC when checking out. Once again, simply click on the link in this episode's description and use code DCTC when checking out to save 15%.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Hello, Dino, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast. Thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here.
You are a former Disneyland skipper, right?
I am. I was a skipper for about 5 years.
5 years. That's a lot of trips around that river.
Yeah, it was quite a bit. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I loved being a skipper.
That's so cool. Of course, this attraction is super classic. The thing that blows my mind about it is, historically, I know Jungle Cruise is a day one Disneyland attraction, but it's kind of crazy to think about. Just to think back 1955, I can't imagine there was anything even close to this experience in a theme or amusement park of any sort.
Yeah, there was nothing like Disneyland at all, let alone the Jungle Cruise. To bring the people into a safari experience that was both dangerous but also very safe, and not having to worry about animals getting in the way and being unpredictable in a way that was every guest got the same basic experience, with some, with the skipper adding a few things eventually. But every guest that could get on the Jungle Cruise was going to get to see the baby rhinos, or they were going to see the hippos floating from the top. It wasn't a hit or miss.
When you train to become a skipper, is this something where you learn the history of the attraction, or
yes,
is it?
And no.
Okay.
We learned some of it, and they absolutely, encourage us to look into more information. They give us the things, but it's not part of the training to know it necessarily. We have to know basic things. We should know that it's a, opening day attraction. They talk to us about the history, about Harper Goff, about all the process of the jungle being created, but not necessarily during training. It's just kind of things you get while you're there. But there is a strong sense of tradition with when you become a Jungle Cruise skipper. There's this idea that this is a unique and very special role that not a lot of people get to do, and not a lot of people get to do that actually care about it, because it is an attractions role. So there are going to be people that do it because it's a job and they want to, get through the day, which is totally understandable. So if you go on the Jungle Cruise and you may not have the best skipper, that's okay. They're not paid necessarily to be funny. They're just paid to run the attraction, technically. So
yeah, so that's kind of interesting. I was going to get into this later, but since we're there, let's just talk about it, because I find this really interesting, because it is a performative role, right? And it's interesting. I would have assumed there was some sort of audition process, but you're saying it kind of just sounds like it's an attractions role, which is bonkers to me.
Yeah, it's literally, it's just part of Adventureland attractions. The same people who work Jungle Cruise also work Indiana Jones or the Tiki Room or Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Like it's all the same land. And it's all the same group of people. The people that load the boats are the same people that are in the boat speaking. Like it's all the same. And there's no real vetting process for picking who becomes a skipper. It's just, well, that's one of the first attractions you can learn in the area. But send them either to Jungle Cruise or Indiana Jones. And that's just how you get it. And sometimes we get lucky and get people that actually really want to be there. Sometimes the casting people like look into the who people are. And like when I interviewed, I actually interviewed for foods because attractions wasn't open. And I talked about my history in theater. I talked about how Jungle Cruise is always my favorite. And they're like, well, we don't have any openings and attractions now, but would you be interested if we did coming up? And I said, well, yeah, absolutely. And then they called and, long story short, I basically they had an opening and they put me into Jungle Cruise right away. And I just kind of like lucked into it. But no, there was no audition. And literally in the training, I was a trainer there as well. Part of the training is we're not training you to be funny. Like you can get signed off to work this attraction without having told a single joke, technically.
That sounds like a horrible mistake, honestly.
Yes.
Because I do feel like it's a coveted role, right? Like I'm a little surprised. I always thought you kind of had to work your way up to Skipper, to be completely honest. So this is kind of shocking news to me.
Yes. So technically, no, there is no audition process. And anybody really who's working the attractions could get there. However, there is, like I said, there's a strong sense of tradition and a strong sense of making sure that we're doing a good job that comes with being a skipper. And so there's this expectation that we put on our trainees. While legally we're not allowed to say, you need to tell these jokes and be funny, there's this idea that we're going to make sure that you have enough time to get through these jokes and to learn them and figure out how they work so that when we get you out on the river, you have the tools you need to succeed. But really the main part of training is making sure they drive the boat safely because they are operating machinery.
Yeah, I guess this probably comes down to a union thing, right? They probably don't want to pay entertainers what they should be paid to run the attraction.
Yeah,
right?
That's a big part of it, especially with an attraction like that we with at from anywhere up to 7 to 8 boats at a time with the loading and unloading crew plus the skippers in the boat and then the shift throughout the day. That's a lot of people. And if they're going to be, even if you just say that only the skippers in the boat are entertainment, everybody else on the dock is attractions, that's another issue you have to deal with. And then comes the part about, okay, well now the script has to be more specific and the idea of entertainment is a lot more of let's make sure they get exactly the same experience exactly the same way because every guest needs to get the same experience, which is good for most things, but it would take the heart out of the Jungle Cruise, I think.
Yeah, the Jungle Cruise is a unique attraction. That was a lot of interesting info, so thank you for sharing all of that. But as I said, it was an opening day attraction, and I think one of the things that's really interesting that a lot of Disney fans love to, like these days, say everything's IP, everything's based on a Disney property, and we don't think of old Disneyland that way, but, the reality is Adventureland was based on Walt Disney's True Life Adventure documentary series from the 1940s. He won Academy Awards for these series. Originally, Adventureland was going to be called True Life Adventureland, really tying it into those. So I find all of that really, really interesting. It was a huge staple of the company at the time. And something we don't think about today, we're just like, oh no, it's just like this unique attraction. But it's like, nah, there was definitely synergy there back in the day.
Oh, absolutely. There's still remnants of the old Adventureland if you look closely. Adventureland used to be more of a kind of a getaway of sorts. Like it felt more like a tropical getaway than a dangerous what's around the corner kind of adventure until the 90s, until Indiana Jones opened.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Before that, it was still like, even if you look at the pictures of old skippers, they're wearing Hawaiian shirts and shorts and sandals. Like they're not wearing the khaki. Or even the indie outfit. They're wearing like getaway outfits. And then there was, the Tahitian terrace right next door where, the tiki room and everything. It was more of a tropical Adventureland versus where it is now, which is like going through the wilds of the, the barely discovered world through the jungle and through the woods and everything. So it's changed, but it definitely, Walt knew that he wanted something like that in his park from the beginning because of his True Life Adventure series, because of his real passion for nature.
What years were you with Skipper?
I was there 2013 to 2018.
Now, of course, Walt, being the dreamer he was, he wanted real animals in the Jungle Cruise, which, would have been awesome, but unrealistic. But I do love the fact that we kind of got that now with Disney's Animal Kingdom. Yeah. I mean, that's that was Walt's dream, having real animals in the parks. And of course, they needed much, much, much more space. But I do find it interesting. You're talking about the different designs and stuff and the different look of the attraction. I find it interesting that when this attraction opened, and the boats were designed after the boats in the movie The African Queen, which was a 1951 movie, but not a Disney movie.
No, it was just something that Walt liked. Yeah, it was one of he just enjoyed the movie. And he looked at it and he said, I want that to be in the jungle. That's perfect. And people knew The African Queen. It was a very popular movie, so people could identify with the style. And when they saw that design, they were like, oh yeah, that's a Jungle Boat. It was just something that they were able to click with right away, which is, again, now that it's changed and the design has changed, the boats have changed because it's no longer what people equate with adventure. It's something, it's something else now. So we had to kind of like tailor it to fit that new aesthetic.
Yeah, and of course the aesthetic changed, but I think the biggest change that would, surprise people perhaps is that when this attraction first opened, it was taken very seriously. It was not a humorous attraction. You were essentially going on a jungle tour with a skipper who was kind of just spewing facts and making casual conversation as opposed to an enormous amount of puns. And I mean, it must have been somewhat boring. Right.
Yeah, I've seen, I mean, even if you look at the Disneyland episode of with Adventureland, the narration kind of throws in a couple like small jokes in there. And I'd like to think that I'm sure the skippers would do a little bit to entertain, not just like, encyclopedia facts. They probably did it in a way that was a little bit more show based because that's what Walt Disney wanted. He was a showman. So that's what he wanted his people to do. But yeah, it's definitely wasn't what it is now. Even the animals weren't really that, like they weren't, you could see a stark difference in the design of the older animals that are still around versus the newer animals that are there. Even just the elephants. Like if you look at the African elephants versus the elephants in the Indian bathing pool, those were designed by Mark Davis, who very clearly made them look like a cartoon. They're like smiling and playing in the river.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the Disneyland TV show you briefly mentioned, this was an episode of the TV show Disneyland in 1956 called A Trip Through Adventureland. So this, I remember seeing this like as a kid late at night on Disney Channel, and just I would suck up anything that was, behind the scenes of the parks, especially with Walt Disney hosting it. And so this was super, I remembered every single beat of this. It was so great, but it was really interesting to see. It shows you like a whole behind the scenes of the making of the Jungle Cruise, and then basically a full ride of it. And I'll be sure to include a link to this in the show notes, folks, so check that out in the episode description. I'll have a link to that. But I just love this. Was there anything about this that really stuck out to you, this little TV special?
I mean, seeing the way that they created the Jungle Cruise, the way that things went into place and how it all started, from digging the trenches to pouring in the water, and the silly thing is like the way they recorded them bringing the rhino around the corner on the wheelbarrow, where it looked like, oh, there's a rhino coming. Oh no, it's just being pulled by a cart. Like things like that, where like even in the making of process, Walt was still a showman. Like he still knew how to make a story about making a different story. Like he was the king of behind the scenes. And it really goes to show the heart that it went into not just Disneyland, but also Jungle Cruise itself. And I mean, there's a few stories I heard. It wasn't mentioned in the video, and it might be legend. I don't know if it's fact, but the story that I was told training at Jungle Cruise, and the stories I've heard over and over again, is that originally Harper Goff, in order to kind of guide where the river was going to be dug, he got onto a tractor or a bulldozer or something, and with a stick to the ground told them where to drive, and would draw the path of the Jungle Cruise with a stick. If anybody knows the truth, it's just the legend I've heard and the story I've been telling.
Yeah, I would believe it, just because even looking back at this TV special, Disneyland was so homemade. You know what I mean? It wasn't like manufactured in a factory the way that things are today. Like, even, I don't know, the thing that cracked me up the most is watching them with those little robotic monkeys. Yeah. Those things looked so flimsy. Like, almost everything that they made, I was like, how did this survive even a month?
Yeah,
it was crazy.
Considering that nobody else was doing those kind of things, like those monkeys, those robots, they were the precursors to audio animatronics. They weren't even that far yet, but they were very advanced. And even then, compared to our standards nowadays, like compare that to like Hondo Onaka's and Kylo Ren in Galaxy's Edge, like they have gone so far since those days of the rickety monkey where the head just pops off. Like,
yeah, and I honestly, it's not even going too far saying, like, in some cases it just looked like a monkey on a stick that was like hopping up and down. Like, it looked almost puppeteered.
Yeah,
it was really hokey, but I mean, it's crazy to look back and see that that's how it started in that TV special. You can see it. But there were also some cool moments that like don't exist anymore, like the charging alligators and stuff. Mm-hmm. We still have alligators in the attraction, but they had like a kind of cool moment where these 3 gators started charging the boat, and through the years things changed, certainly, and that was one of the things that just no longer exists.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fascinating to look back at how it originally started. As you said, the Imagineer that led this attraction was Harper Goff. But years later, Walt Disney did decide that the attraction needed some updating, and that's when he brought in Mark Davis, and this was in the early 60s, and he kind of plussed the attraction, and as you said, added a ton of humor to it. And it is funny because these days, of course, right now, there's changes happening at the Jungle Cruise, and a lot of people like to like get up in arms about, yeah, it's a classic, it's an opening day classic, and I'm like, it's been changed quite a few times, not only in Walt's lifetime, but even beyond that already. But I would say this was probably like the first big time when Mark Davis went in and added that humor, added some of these more comedic elements, these more cartoony elements. Like you said, the animals started to look cuter, started to have smiles on their faces. Mm-hmm. And it actually makes me think of, I'm sure you know the story of like the Haunted Mansion and how it has 2 very different styles. It has like a comedic style and then a very dark, scary style. And it's kind of like a mix of the two. And Jungle Cruise unnaturally became that. It started out as a very serious attraction, and then Mark Davis got his hands on it and started adding those comedic elements. I do have to say the elephant pool is one of my absolute favorite moments. Still to this day, I love that scene.
It's so much fun, and it's one of my favorites. It's the first time as a skipper, you get to bring the guests around the corner and they get to see, like, before it's like, oh, there's a butterfly over here. Oh, the shrine's pretty cool. Oh, no, a tiger and some alligators. And then boom, look at all these elephants, like it's the first moment of wonder really that we see in the Jungle Cruise. And as a skipper, I love to play off of that. And I try to instill that in my trainees and my fellow skippers, letting them know, like, there's things that we see in the jungle every day that technically in the story we don't see every day. This is new to us, so react to them. Like, we're not expecting to see all these elephants bathing at the same time. Like, we know the pool's here, but to see them all just sitting there having fun, Bertha in the waterfall, like it's unique and it's special, and we should react accordingly. And as long as we put that energy forward, typically the guests will also share that because they're already excited. They're like, whoa, look at these elephants. They're squirting each other with water. That's incredible. And if the skipper's like, well, yeah, there's elephants over there, then it like minimizes it.
Yeah.
But it's meant to be this big moment, where a big, funny and awesome moment.
It is a grand reveal. I mean, that's the best part of attractions, right? I think one of the best of the older attractions is in Pirates of the Caribbean, when you finally come out of the caves and see the ship, and you're like, oh my gosh, this space is huge.
Yep.
And that, the elephant pool is kind of that moment for Jungle Cruise. It's up until that point, you've kind of had like the trees overhanging, especially in current days where it's all grown in and stuff. And then all of a sudden it's more open air and you've got all the elephants there. So it is very cool. But and of course the trapped safari is another Mark Davis scene that was added.
Very silly.
Basically if it's funny or if it has, a cartoony looking character, Mark Davis put his little touch on that.
Yeah, through the years.
I would assume his sense of humor for the characters kind of added this sense of humor into the Skippers as well. And this is kind of when the attraction started heading in that direction, which was... it was a change, but it was... I'd be curious to know if there were people back then. You know how like Disney fans love to get upset with any little change. Yeah. Move a bench and you get upset. I'd be curious if there were people like, oh, they took the dignity out of this attraction,
There might have been. I feel like they mentioned about how Walt overheard how people said like, oh, we already rode that. We don't have to ride it again. I don't think Jungle Cruise had that like devout following that it does now, because it was just sort of Jungle Cruise. It was nice and it was cool, but it wasn't something that had like that wow factor, that like the very entertaining aspect that the Skippers and the humor added later. And I think that for the most part, I'm sure it was embraced with open arms, maybe not by everybody, but I can't imagine people were upset back then as a bunch of people were upset now.
Yeah, no, it would be interesting. I feel like it's an attraction that was probably the grandest of scale when the park first opened, right? There was nothing bigger that I can think of, because like Pirates and Haunted Mansion would come many years later. There was no Matterhorn. There were a lot of kiddie dark rides in Fantasyland.
Yeah. The only thing that would be bigger, I mean, Frontierland was like one giant attraction, with all the rails, the railroad and everything. But I don't think that counts as being bigger.
Yeah, I don't know. I find it a little surprising that people were like, I've already ridden it. I just feel like it was like the e-ticket of the day, even though that didn't exist at the time. But I don't know. It's interesting that people would be like, nah, it's not repeatable.
Again, it's probably just because it was, robot animals on the boat, and they didn't really get that many different things from a different ride. It was the same thing over and over again, which is like, it's like saying, getting bored of, Haunted Mansion. It's the same ride over and over again, but still it's fun to be on it. And I to that sense, I'm sure that people enjoy Jungle Cruise the same way. They were like, we love Jungle Cruise. It's great. We went on it this week. We'll go on it next time. That's okay. Like, we don't have to go on it again.
Plus, I mean, let's face it, back then people weren't going to Disneyland nearly as often.
Well,
I don't think. No annual passes at that point.
No.
But and none today. So we're repeating history.
Yeah.
But in 1994, there was the big retheming of this area, and that's because of Indiana Jones Adventure. Indiana Jones Adventure changed the entire look of Adventureland. Like you said, it went from kind of a vacation spot to a real adventure.
Yeah.
And everything was rethemed to the 1930s. The ride was even shortened. And this was something that I kept thinking about recently with remember when they shut down the railroad at Disneyland and they were moving the track a bit?
I was there during that time.
Oh, okay, for the construction of Galaxy's Edge. And people were like very upset, like, oh my gosh, they're shortening the track. I'm pretty sure that happened already when these changes happened for Indiana Jones Adventure. So once again, not unprecedented for something like that to happen.
I don't know how much smaller the railroad got, because they'd still lived along the berm of the park. But this move for sure was one of the ones that, like, I mean, they did take out one of the tracks. There was multiple tracks originally for the Disneyland Railroad. At some point there were two. There was like the main path, and then there was a secondary path, a wayside, and you could technically stop at every station, or you could go on the full route. But they did shorten it and make it give you less options eventually. But yeah, this one was the first time it really the tracks came into the park, and they adjusted the berm because of the new land.
Yeah, and they shortened the Jungle Cruise for Indiana Jones Adventure, and I'm sure you've seen that concept art of what Indiana Jones Adventure was going to be, where like Jungle Cruise was going to be going through it, and the railroad was going to be going through it, and Indy was obviously part of it. And oh gosh, that blue sky concept art is just stunning.
It would have been.
I wish that could have
cool.
become. Yeah, if that could have, that would have been a great reality.
Yeah.
If that could have been. But, it didn't happen. And, but Indiana Jones did open. It's still a huge epic attraction that's there today. Mm-hmm. But it did affect the Jungle Cruise quite a bit. Now let's fast forward to a bunch of years to 2013 to what I thought was incredible. Now, were you there for Jingle Cruise?
I was there for the first year, yeah.
Oh man, so first year was horrible, no offense. But second year they really got their stuff together, and they plussed the heck out of it. Were you there for the second year?
Yes. So I was there, and I was very fortunate to kind of know the people behind it and the reasoning why behind things. One of the reasons why the first year wasn't all out was because, one, they weren't sure what to do with it, as far as budgeting and everything like that. And two, the people behind it love the Jungle Cruise, and they wanted to make sure that the integrity of the Jungle Cruise was still intact. And they couldn't figure out a way to do that without messing things up. Like in their eyes, which we understood as skippers, why would the elephants have Christmas decorations? Why would there be decorations in the native camps? They didn't make sense for the jungle. And so they tried to be very true to what the Jungle Cruise is, and they put the decorations where they thought they would fit better, like in the gorilla camp, because that's a human base camp, so it makes sense that our base camp would have decorations and stuff that got ruined. In the boathouse, obviously, we would decorate for Christmas and the holidays. So they started with that, and then because the rest of the jungle wasn't decorated, they were like, well, do 50% holiday jokes. And then the rest do regular jokes, because we still have to reference the regular other stuff. And then throughout the days, the skippers came up with things and would submit jokes and start telling jokes and alter other things to make them more holiday themed. But that was the first year, and we liked it. As skippers, we enjoyed it. But it didn't go over with the guests, because they're like, well, we could go to Haunted Mansion where they change the whole thing, or we can go to Jungle Cruise where we see a few boxes and trees. It wasn't. You're right. It wasn't as good as it should have been. So the first year was done through Imagineering, mostly, mm-hmm. and the second year was done. Creative Entertainment came in, and this guy Bill Sandahl, he was all about making it big, and him and his team came in, and they were talking about what they wanted to do, and they decided the story of the shipment was dropped over the jungles of the world, which is a stretch. Fine.
But listen, it's the Jungle Cruise. It's all a stretch, right?
Yeah, it's exactly.
The jokes are a stretch. It fit. You know what? I having heard the story of what their thinking process was the first year, I actually do respect that, mm-hmm. and I didn't know that. So thanks for sharing that. But I will say, you don't need to think that hard about integrity, I feel like, when it comes to Jungle Cruise, because it's ridiculous. Ridiculous. So, and
they certainly made it ridiculous with that second year. And all of us kind of just embraced it. We're just like, okay, this is what it's going to be like. The story is a little far-fetched, but whatever. We're driving through the jungles of the world in 7 minutes. It's going to be fine.
Totally. And I love what they did in 2014. I think it lasted one more year in Disneyland, maybe a couple. Yeah. But eventually they got rid of it at Disneyland, continued it at Walt Disney World. And to be honest, having done both, I think Disneyland did it better. So I'm really confused / bummed that it stopped coming to Disneyland. I just assume it was a budget thing.
I don't know the actual answer. They didn't bring it back one year. Oh God, I can't remember if that was the year of the redo of the dock or not.
Oh, I remember that. It was closed for a while because of that. Yeah.
I don't think it was that year. I think it was the year after that. They closed it and they said, "Oh, it's going to be closed this year," and they made it seem like it was going to come back. But then after a while, they're like, "Well, it doesn't seem like it's going to be coming back." And then after it didn't come back the next year, we're like, "Okay, that's it. It's done." There's no way.
It's too bad. It was a really nice addition, and frankly, I'd love to see it come back sometime in the future. I'm sure the decorations are somewhere.
Well, some of them.
Florida? They're in Florida.
Some of them are there. I'll tell you, though, one of the coolest things is when they install that stuff, the team that installs the lighting and the props and everything like that, they can't necessarily just go through the jungle. They need some of us driving boats around and helping them get there. So we got to work shifts where literally it was me, a couple tech guys, and a boat full of garland driving into the jungle and them putting the props up and everything like that. Like I have pictures that I'm not supposed to show anybody, but it's just literally a whole jungle boat filled to the brim with garland.
That's so cool. I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah, and those were fun shifts. Sometimes they were like 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. shifts, like overnight, and we all were tired, and we would just get a whole bunch of like instant hot cocoa and just drink it throughout the night, and it was a good time. And I met some good people working those shifts, people from audio and from props and from in creative entertainment. So it was a very unique experience, and I miss Jingle Cruise. I miss Jungle in general, but I wish that it stuck around a little bit longer, because after that first year, we kind of all got the hang of it, and we're like, okay, it's ridiculous, but we can make this good and we can make this funny. And then the second year came around and we all were on board and we got it. We were like, yeah, Jingle Cruise is back. This is great. And then after that, that was it.
So, of course, the Jungle Cruise has had some of its problems through the years. One of the more current things is the negative depictions of Native people. So recently, Jungle Cruise reopened in Disneyland on July 16th. And full disclosure, this is being recorded before that reopening, so there may be some additional surprises that we don't know about just yet. But what we do know is that the Skipper will now also be presented by a show figure in the attraction, and the journey has essentially gone awry. But this is kind of exciting. Like this role that's been part of the Jungle Cruise forever is now a legitimate part of the story. I think this is very cool.
I agree. And, that's one of the things that we talked about a lot during training was one of the things was that it's not your story. It's the people in the boat's story. So always make sure that you're making sure they're discovering things and they're being rewarded for this journey, because we get to do this all the time. They don't care about us. They care about what their experience in the jungle. And there is a story to it already if you know how to do it and if you know how to do it. But of course, not everybody gets those things. Not everybody gets the timing and the how to tell a story when there really isn't much of one. So this idea of putting the Skipper into the story of the jungle, I think will make it easier for skippers, considering it is an attraction with attraction hosts, not entertainment people. I think it'll make it easier for those people to latch on to that kind of story, where it makes it more of a through line and with peaks and valleys of energy, and hopefully make it so that those skippers that are not as practiced in entertaining and speaking and being funny, that they get to latch onto this story and have a better cruise already,
One of the pieces of concept art that I just really loved was we see one of the ride vehicles, one of the boats sinking and split in half. And I love that that's become part of the story. I just have immediate Jaws flashbacks. If you've ever done Jaws the Ride in Florida, I was just like, oh, yes, which made me very happy. But, the attraction's backstory is centered around Alberta Falls, who is the granddaughter of world-renowned Dr. Albert Falls. Of course, we know that name, and is the proprietor of the Jungle Navigation Company, Ltd. And, there's a lot of backstory here, most of which guests will never know about, and that's okay. I mean, it's interesting. So much story is put into everything at Disneyland, and in the case of this especially, because Dr. Albert Falls is a member of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, so C, which is this huge backstory in and of itself. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much minutia when it comes to that it's going to be 99% of it is going to be missed. But the fact that it exists is super cool. And I think that that's the thing that you've got to kind of do with attractions these days, is put these super deep backstories so that you get these insane details that like 5% of people will notice and care about. But the thing that you got to make sure is that those details aren't necessary for an enjoyable attraction. And I think that, Jungle Cruise, even there was more backstory to it even before, right? Like that most guests didn't know. So it's always been like that, but I think even more so now.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And you know what? The Alberta Falls backstory kind of was thrown in before all this, but it wasn't really pushed hard. They adjusted some things and they started adding C into Adventureland. Slow, like if you go into where Tropical Imports is now, what used to be the Indiana Jones store in Adventureland, there are pictures on the wall of C, of all the members of C. I don't know if Alberta Falls in there, but she might be. But they had references to that. They had letters and things. And if you look through the queue at Jungle Cruise, you might see some references to Alberta Falls, to the Jungle Navigation Company. And I can only imagine, obviously we haven't seen it yet, but I can only imagine they're working in the queue itself as well to put more clues and hints and allow people to get some of this backstory. Just like any other attraction, you have to dig more to find the full story. But I feel like they would be remiss if they don't. And I'm sure they thought of that.
Well, I mean, supposedly they're working on this whole theme parks universe thing for Disney Plus, and supposedly there's going to be a sea attraction, or at least it's being developed. Whether or not it actually happens, I guess we'll see. But if that's the case, we're going to start learning a lot more about all of this stuff, and it's going to get really interesting. And gosh, sea goes all around the world at this point. It's fascinating. Trader Sam is still part of the story, even though that character is problematic. Of course, the bars do far too well for them to get rid of Trader Sam. So, still part of the story, and is now managing the lost and found. So I don't think we're going to be seeing that figure anymore. It sounds like he's off looking for more items while some animals cause problems at that little last moment in the attraction. But I think this granted, I have not experienced it yet, but it sounds like pluses to me for the most part. It sounds like a lot. I mean, I can say with certainty that the people who have been working on this certainly seem to be die-hard Jungle Cruise fans. This wasn't like taken lightly. And even just the press releases that they've released, I mean, they are deep storylines. It's kind of crazy.
All of this is done with love. Like anybody who says they're ruining the Jungle Cruise doesn't understand the people that are doing this. Kevin Lively, who was in the video, he's an Imagineer talking about it. He was a former skipper. And I didn't know him as a skipper, but I knew him shortly after. And he was one of the people behind Jingle Cruise. It was his idea, mostly his idea, that he kind of brought to reality the first year. And that's why he wanted to keep everything, keep the integrity of the jungle intact in his mind, because he cared about it so much. And so he thought if he did the typical overlay that he would ruin the Jungle Cruise, and he didn't want to do that. And it turns out that the guests wanted to see that. So he just didn't realize that at first. And he was part of the next iteration of Jingle Cruise, obviously, as well. But and then seeing him up there talking about the Jungle Cruise, they definitely have people that care. And you can see there's a lot of details in here from things that you wouldn't know unless you really paid attention to the Jungle Cruise. Things like in the picture of the boat that's sunk, it says Congo Kate is what it is, which is not the name of a boat. That's just it's the Congo Queen. And Kate might be referencing a former skipper. I'm not sure, but I think, like I said, I think this is going to add a new story element that guests can latch onto, but also skippers can latch onto to enhance the experience of the already entertaining Jungle Cruise.
Yeah, as you were talking about Jungle Cruise again, I had a thought. I think we need a Dr. Osborne in C so that we can have the Jungle Cruise Osborne Spectacle of Dancing Lights edition. Boom.
Oh my gosh.
Sold. Can you even imagine? That would be spectacular. Can you imagine the lines for that? That would be insane.
Oh man, theme parks nowadays and their lines. Anything new is going to have a ridiculous line. And I guarantee Jungle Cruise's line, even in the 5 years that I was there, I watched it go from a regular 15-minute, 20-minute line to like, we were regularly during the summer 45 minutes to 60 minutes every day. And it was nuts. It blew my mind because we were working even more efficiently than normal than when we were in the past. But for some reason, everybody wanted to ride Jungle Cruise.
Yeah.
Which is
crazy.
Awesome. I love it. Bring them on. People need to realize the Jungle Cruise is like the best ride at Disneyland.
Let's take a moment to talk about Skipper Canteen in Magic Kingdom, because this is kind of cool. This is a restaurant that's based on the Jungle Cruise attraction and serves as the main headquarters and mess hall for the Jungle Navigation Company that runs the cruises. So, of course, this actually kind of started, involving the skippers as part of the storyline as well. So this started a little while ago. I don't know if you've eaten there, but it's fantastic.
I've actually never been to Disney World.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, it is it's a really great restaurant. One of my it's in the top for me at Magic Kingdom. It's really, really good. But they break it up so that there's the main mess hall where the skippers would eat, and then there's the meeting room for the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, which is kind of this secret room that's tucked away, and there's the jungle room, which is actually the Falls family parlor. And they did just such a great job. And like you said, with, even in the stores at Disneyland, there are so many little hidden, moments from the books selected to be on the shelves and stuff. It's really, It's intense. It's insane. It's crazy.
Like I said, I've never been to Walt Disney World, but I know that, again, it was created by people who love the jungle. And actually, there are references to Disneyland jungle skippers, like the greats that we tell tales of all the time. I can't tell you at the top of my head where and what it is. I know there's a reference to who was the A lead for a long time at Jungle, Jason Lewis. His name was referenced in there somewhere. I can't remember where it is, but I know Lewis is in there somewhere. And I believe Randy Grant, he's been there 30 plus years, 40 years now. Yeah.
Crazy.
He's been a staple of the jungle for a long time, which is really cool because I work with former skippers at my other job now, and one of them he was there in the 80s, and they were like, he was like, oh yeah, I don't think anybody from my days are around. So I was like, well, Randy's still there. And he was like, oh yeah, Randy.
That's funny. Now, since you haven't done it, one of the cool things about Jungle Cruise at Magic Kingdom is there is an indoor portion of it where you actually ride through a cave. And that's kind of a nice addition. Of course, they all have their own little differences. As of course, it's at Disneyland, it's at Magic Kingdom. It's also at Tokyo Disneyland and even Hong Kong Disneyland. And I believe Hong Kong's the one where you ride around Tarzan's treehouse and there's this big finale with water explosions and fire and stuff.
That one's much more of a showy version of it. It's not just a trounce through the jungle.
Yeah, but I mean, it's amazing to think that this attraction from 1955 is still being replicated. And of course, that's not that abnormal in the world of Disney. It happens all the time. But I mean, it says something for certain that's still the case.
And now a major motion picture.
Before we get to that, I do have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
As far as being a skipper is concerned. There's obviously a reason for it, because at one point the skippers used to shoot the hippos and that's what would quote unquote cause them to fall underwater. Now the shots are up in the air. So obviously they could have just removed the whole gunshot thing in general, which I'm a little surprised they haven't at this point, to be complete. Oh, did they for this update?
No, there was a moment in time where they got rid of the guns. I can't remember the reason, but they used air horns for a little time.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, it was awful.
Oh.
I can't remember what the catalyst for it was, but I know skippers
probably to get rid of guns is my guess. They just wanted to get guns out of the attraction. So interesting. I didn't remember them changing it to air horns, but obviously, so they're making a sound of some sort for some reason. What is this all about? What are you signaling?
So the idea is that we're scaring the hippos away. Technically, we fire 2 shots specifically. And that kind of becomes the signal to the boats around you that you're in the hippo pool. So if there's a boat behind you, they know, oh, I might be too close to that boat. Maybe I should slow down. If there's a boat in front of you, they might be like, oh, crap, I got to speed up because they're right behind me. There's a whole idea of pacing. You're never supposed to see another boat in the jungle except at Schweitzer Falls, because it kind of takes away the idea of you're out there in the jungle by yourself kind of thing. So there's an idea of pacing that we try to teach our skippers. There's a curve that always happens. We train them and they pace pretty well. Then as soon as they get on their own, they go too fast. And so they're always trying to speed through because they're like, oh gosh, I don't know what to say. They just go through, and then they get comfortable and then they go way too slow. And they try to fit in all the jokes they ever want to tell. And then finally, after about a year, they find a middle ground and they get to the right pacing. But those 2 shots are specifically to kind of this is normal operation, 2 shots, bang, bang. And if we ever hear more than 2 shots, something's wrong.
You're sinking.
Ideally not. That's a very that's a worst case scenario. Well, one of the worst case scenarios. But yeah, it's something like that. It's for some reason there's something wrong with the boat or the jungle. It's usually not devastating. It's usually just like my boat can't move, something like that.
Yeah.
And you just got
somebody dropped their iPhone in the river. Oh no.
Oh no, we don't stop for that. No, that's sorry. If you drop your phone, I'm sorry about it. We'll try to get it, but there's nothing we can do.
So it's mostly for the boat behind you and in front of you. I guess those shows. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
But the reason why they changed it is because the idea of shooting at the animals became a thing about violence. Same thing with how they changed the lion and the zebra. They used to be ripping the zebra apart, and now they're just kind of like growling over one, and we say that it's sleeping because it's nicer for the kids for some reason.
Yeah. Now, of course, through the years, there have been lots of jokes and puns added to the Jungle Cruise, and I'm sure there are some skippers who just say what they want, but I believe there's an official process, right? If you think of a new joke, you're supposed to submit it, and then there's an approval process?
Yes. Pretty much every year, they'll like put out a box that says joke submittals for whatever you want to do, and they do them in batches, so they don't read through them every month or whatever. They'll kind of like gather them all at the end of the year or whatever time they do it, and they'll read through a bunch of them, and then sometimes the next iteration of the script will come out, and there'll be some new jokes and some taken out instead. And it's less of a script and more of a collection of jokes. Here, like these are the different options that you may have for this scene and this scene and this scene, and progresses through. And the idea is that we stay in the spirit of what is in our operating guide, our OG, we call it. Not we used to say not OG, not okay. But it was the idea that like if the root of what you're saying, the root of your story, of your joke is in your operating guide, it's probably okay. As long as it remains in theme, it doesn't take anybody out of the story. It's not saying anything inappropriate. If it's rooted in a joke or a premise that's already in there, you're safe. And then we were encouraged, of course, to come up with new things and try new things, as long as it stayed in the spirit of the script. And a lot of us tried to do new things. Some people went too far. Some people said jokes that they know they're not supposed to say, like, hate to break it to you, but the whole, let me scare away the hippos, I love you, that's not allowed, technically. But a lot of
that's a good joke. I like that one.
It's hilarious. But some power be decided, let's not tell that joke. And we tried to tell people, don't tell that joke. But of course, people love it, and they're going to tell it anyway. And you're alone. Like, you're not recorded out there. Nobody knows what you're saying unless they happen to overhear it or in your boat.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I'm convinced a couple years ago, I was on a boat and my skipper, I'm pretty sure, was like, let me go through the operating guide and find every joke that is like the most underused one or most rarely used one, because I had a ride that, like, listen, I've ridden the Jungle Cruise quite a bit. I would say 85 to 90% of what the skipper said I had never heard before. And I was laughing my butt off. I was like, this dude loves his job. And I love that he just went with like the really random jokes. It was hilarious to me.
It's funny because if a lead or a manager hears somebody coming off the phone, it's like, oh man, I've never heard those jokes before. Their first instinct is like, oh no, what did they say?
Yeah.
But it really, all it is most of the time they're jokes that either aren't told often, or people find their spin on a joke or combine jokes. Do you remember the skipper's name by any chance?
I have no idea.
Just wondering.
But it was very, very, very funny. Are there any jokes that you submitted that are now part of the attraction?
I did not. No, I took my own spin on things, but I never submitted a new joke. I had a lot of friends that did, and one of the Jungle greats, Kip Hart, who is a comedian as well, he submitted quite a few jokes, and he was one of those people that was notorious. I love you, Kip, and I hope you're not. I mean, you might still be working there, but still, don't get in trouble. He would say things that were definitely not OG, but he was hilarious. There was one time where he was at load, and I was loading people into his boat, and he looks up at me, and this was normal for Kip. He looked up at me and be like, "Hey, Dino, how's your mom doing?" And I'm an improv actor, so I take things, like, he knows that, so he plays with me. And I was like, "Oh, she's doing great." He's like, "Oh yeah, she's doing good. Everything going all right with her?" It's like, "Yeah, healthy, no complaints. Talked to her a lot yesterday." He's like, "Okay, great." did she get that cake I sent her? And I said, yeah, she loves chocolate. And he goes, okay, great. I hope she gets out of prison soon. Anyways, let's go. And we're like, and that was it. And everybody in the boat was like, what? And I was like, yeah, me too. See you later.
Oh, that's fun. Oh, the joke I'm expecting. Well, we're going to get into the movie, but I do find it interesting, especially in this time of, we saw what happened with Pirates of the Caribbean, where the movie ended up influencing the attraction. I do find it very interesting that at this moment where they're like, okay, we're going to make changes to Jungle Cruise, and we have a new movie coming out. Like, they very specifically said these updates to the ride are not influenced by the movie. And I find that surprising, number one. But I do think, even if it's not OG, there's going to be somebody who's going to be like, and now the star of the new Jungle Cruise movie, and they're going to point to a rock. Like, that's going to happen, right? Somebody's going to do that.
We made those jokes already. Like, we did that before we closed, before it closed. Like, I remember doing that. I left in 2018 when we found out it was happening. And was it that long ago they announced this movie? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I guess so.
Holy moly. Yeah. The last year and a half doesn't count. So we're just going to skip through that. But yeah, we all hoped, please don't make this like a movie. And because the people who are involved in these redos and plussing of Jungle Cruise, they know that it won't be as genuine if we base it off of a movie. Instead, I think we might see references to the ride in the movie, but not.
We definitely will. Yeah, we in the teaser trailer that they released, we definitely see. I think it's going to be like in the original Pirates of the Caribbean, where there are little moments that if you know the ride, you're like, that's directly from
that
it.
Was in there.
In the teaser trailer, we kind of see Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson kind of playing a skipper, but the thing is, he created all of these, robotic figures, but they're very handmade and stuff, and he's trying to scare characters, and it was very funny, and even the backside of water was part of it, and that original trailer was exciting for a Disney Parks fan for sure. Now they have since come out with more trailers. Of course, this movie is finally being released on July 30th. It's been delayed a ton because of the pandemic, but in it, there's a tree that possesses unparalleled healing power, and they're in search for that. And it looks very much like a Pirates movie to me. I'm looking forward to it, but it looks very much like Pirates of the Caribbean. I think it's pretty much public knowledge that that's what they're going for. They're trying to have that successful run of multiple Jungle Cruise movies, and hopefully it's successful for them in that way.
Yeah, I would certainly love to see more jungle adventures, especially taking them across different jungles of the world. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily say in the Jungle Cruise movie trailers about where they're like what rivers they're visiting, but because in the Jungle Cruise we have lots of different rivers present. Not just the boat names, but also the rivers you actually go through. Technically, you go through the Mekong, the Congo, the Yangtze, the Irrawaddy, the Nile, obviously. So it'd be cool to see that adventure taking them to another part of the world, a different jungle, a different river. But I'm interested to see the story because the first teaser trailer, it didn't look as magical. It was the later trailers where we started seeing like the weird like vine things and stuff like that, and that's what I was like, oh, okay, this definitely does look like Pirates of the Caribbean, which makes sense. It's a boat on the water, Pirates of the Caribbean, but
rivers instead of oceans.
Exactly, and the boats are much less grand.
Yeah, true. But yeah, no, it should be. I'm excited to finally see it. Of course, as I said, it's hitting theaters on July 30th. It's hitting theaters on July 30th. How exciting is that?
Yeah, I went to the theaters for the first time last week, and I was thrilled.
Alrighty, Dino. Now it's time for some trivia.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
Alrighty, Dino, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
I'll go first because you might have better ones than I do.
Okay. What's a trivia question you got?
Okay, so do you know who is? I guess it's a two-parter. Do you know who is responsible for the foliage of the jungle?
Oh, I know. It's a very well-known, respected. I don't know if Imagineer was. I don't think he was an Imagineer, but I don't know the name, but I know that it was a big deal.
Bill Evans is his name.
Bill Evans.
He was in charge of making the jungle look like the jungle. And did you know that there was he invented his own version of a plant that exists in the Jungle Cruise?
Is this the ones that they planted upside down?
No. Do you know what kind of plant that is?
I don't, but I know that there was a tree or a plant of some sort that he planted upside down because he thought it looked more unique and adventurous.
Orange trees.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, well, gosh, that's funny because that's what used to. So there were the trees that were probably, part of Disneyland.
Yeah, and there is still one orange tree upside down planted that still remains, and it's in the Cambodian shrine by the crocodile.
Oh, that's so funny.
It's barely visible, but it's still there. But no, that's not what it is. It's actually. Do you want me to let you guess?
You can. I mean, I'm not going to guess. No, what's up?
Have you seen? It's a type of philodendron, which are the big elephant ear plants.
Okay.
And if you see the philodendron they look like fingers, where it's like broken up on the leaf and they look all wrinkly and fingery like. Yeah. Those are called the Philodendron Evans Eye.
And what, like he breeded them or what?
He was a horticulturist, him and his brother, and they breeded it. I think they're not sure exactly when, but it was sometime between like the mid 40s to the early 50s before Jungle Cruise opened, before Disneyland opened. And he brought that plant because it was something that him and his brother kind of created. It wasn't, he didn't make a new plant. It was just a different species, a different version of a philodendron. And there are other philodendrons in the Jungle Cruise, but that one specifically is the Philodendron Evans Eye. And I believe it's very much apparent in the elephant bathing pool. That's where you see a lot of them. But it was named after Bill Evans, hence Evans Eye.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, my question for you is, well, as previously mentioned, there will be a lot of references to the Society of Explorers and Adventurers in the updated ride. And at Magic Kingdom, you can find even more references, as I said, in Skipper Canteen. But where can you find additional references in Disneyland, not in the store that you previously mentioned?
To see?
Yes.
In Disneyland. Oh, man. I think I know this, but now I'm losing it.
I'll give you a hint. It's still in Adventureland.
It is still in Adventureland. Oh, it's the Tropical Hideaway?
Yes. Do you know where it is there?
I don't know exactly where it is. It's probably on like a paddle or something.
It is. There's a wall of expedition paddles left behind by members of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, and it has all their names on it. So very good.
Yeah, I was there for the opening of that.
Oh, cool.
I very, very nearly missed getting a messenger bag, a tote bag made out of the old tiki shirts. And I'm very upset about it.
Oh, man. That was a nice addition, though. They did a good job, and you get a nice, cool view of the Jungle Cruise that you didn't get before. It's more associated with the Tiki Room, but still, some Jungle Cruise kind of tie-ins there, so it's very cool.
And I mean, in the sense, they kind of made Rosita a skipper in the sorts, telling her jokes and everything.
Exactly. Well, Dino, thanks so much for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for sharing your stories from your skipper days, and thanks for your years of service as a skipper.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
I hope you all enjoyed today's conversation. If you didn't catch my recent conversation about Pixar's latest movie, Luca, you'll definitely want to go back and check that one out. And next week, we're back with more of the latest Disney news. The easiest way to make sure you don't miss any of the magic is by subscribing to Disney Coast to Coast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you search, don't forget, it's Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast. You can find any links and info mentioned in this episode, along with ways to connect with today's guest co-host, by checking out the show notes link in this episode's description. This episode has been executive produced by Robert Scontrino. Gain rewards like Robert by visiting patreon.com/Disney with a Z CTC. And don't forget to leave a voicemail at 818-860-2569 to share your thoughts on today's conversation and the chance to be heard on a future episode. You can find that number in this episode's description along with a link for some free gifts from me to you. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at depodcastnetwork.com. That's DEPodcastnetwork.com.